100 lines painted over me. Oh, oh. The thousand times that I tried to leave. Oh, oh. One slip and I fall all over again. Tell me what you want me. I can't go on in your fantasy. Left your mark, now it's plain to see. Oh, oh. My paper heart towards you recklessly. Oh, oh. Your name inked across my pages of white. Tell me what you want from me. I'm paralyzed, buried underneath. Oh, oh. Say you'll come on home. I want you, baby, I need you the most. Can you hear me? Won't you say you'll come on home? 'Cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. And I'm begging, won't you say you'll come on home? 'Cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. Can you hear me? Won't you say you'll come on home? 'Cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. We're wearing paper thin. Thousand times that I tried to leave. Oh, oh. One slip and I fall all over again. Tell me what you want me. I can't go on in your fantasy. Oh, oh. Say you'll come on home, 'cause I want you, baby. left your mark, now it's plain to see. Oh, oh. My paper heart towards you recklessly. Oh, oh. Your name inked across my pages of white. Tell me what you want from me. I'm paralyzed, buried underneath. Oh, oh. Say you'll come on home, 'cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. Can you hear me? Won't you say you'll come on home? 'Cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. And I'm begging, won't you say you'll come on home? 'Cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. Can you hear me? Won't you say you'll come on home? 'Cause I want you, baby, I need you the most. We're wearing paper thin.
Check. Hey everyone, how's it going? Nice to see all of you again. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Tips and Tricks of dolltr. Nice to see all of you, and wanted to say a quick shout out to Andrew and Paul. Hey, from Canada. Yay, very cool. Thanks so much for everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate all of you joining us again on another Monday. Oh gosh, my camera's shaking. But yeah, here we are. We are back for another Monday stream. My name's dolltr, and I also go by Claire. Well, I go by Claire, but I also go by dolltr. With 343 Labs, I'm an instructor, and I'm also an Ableton Certified Trainer. And some of the people watching have taken class with me before, which is awesome. But today, I am back to share a bit more about live with all of you. I'm also just going to make sure that my volumes are all set. Let's see. Cool. There we go. It's like I wasn't sure if the live broadcast was going. Sometimes there's a bit of delay between myself and YouTube. But no, absolutely, we should be doing okay. Great. And as you can see, for today, I've also got something beside me over here. I've got Push. And that's because we may or may not do some things with Push. I may show you some things that you might be able to do in relation to audio, which was our topic last week. We talked about how we could, do different kinds of things, converting audio to MIDI and vice versa. So that's what we have over here in our live set. This was a live set that we created together last week after doing some looping and throwing all of these things together. Also jumping a little bit on what I did a couple of weeks ago about looping as well and what it means to do live looping, especially with a controller and kind of how that relates to the overall idea of controllerism. Today, this controller in particular is called Push, which is by Ableton, the company. And I think one of the greatest strengths of it is that it integrates so tightly with live. Most of the time when I'm, exploring ideas and thinking of different ways to make all sorts of different kinds of beats, especially if I'm more in an exploratory mode than a direct writing kind of mode, I end up using Push a lot. So I'm going to show you a couple of things today that I use for, as far as techniques go, to make the most out of Push, but more importantly, make the most out of live using Push. And I'm going to show you a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to show you, for Push in general, some things that I like to do from it. And I guess the most straightforward thing is to launch different clips. And I've done a couple of workshops on the 343 Labs YouTube channel before for Push related stuff. So please check those out if you're interested in finding out more about using Push from me and my workshops. And that said, also, for those of us who maybe are just joining in or haven't heard before or are watching this after the fact, 343 Labs is a school that's based in Manhattan in New York in the United States, but we also are opening up a Berlin school too, and our co-founder Max is over there holding down the ropes, and he's setting all of that up. So please check that out if you're interested. You can head over to 343labs.de for our German side of things, or if you want to just head over to our overall website for our general operations, that's going to be 343labs.com. And you can also put any questions you have into the chat. I'll be trying to keep an eye out for the chat as well. And Thomas from 343 Labs, who's always amazing at running whatever's going on behind the scenes, can also help us with questions if there are any questions. But with that said, let's head over to live. And let's maybe do a bit of a refresher. So last week, I took some suggestions from the audience, and we created something that was a little bit drum and bassy with different kinds of loops as well. Let's refresh our memories. We started off with this drum loop. And from Push, I'm also going to make it softer. And then we had some pads along with that, which was really just like a single note. So we had those. And then I had some vocal loops. Can get them together. And then we pitched them up as well. An octave higher. Cool. And I'm gonna pause the vocals for a second. We looped those and we recorded those in real time. And instead, also, not instead, but on top of that, we also did some resampling related loop-based structures. So we re-recorded that first as part of the initial loop that we wanted to experiment with. And then we made it into this. And we also made like some other interesting things. So we created all of those things together, and I'm going to stop all clips by launching an empty scene. There we go. Cool. So that was something that we did just as a bit of a recap from last week. Today, though, I wanted to, like I said, show you a couple more things related to working with audio, specifically working with audio on Push. And one thing that you may have remembered me do last week is that, yes, I did resample something of the vocals, like this, for example, where all the effects were baked into this new sample. Because the original vocal sample that we had was pretty dry, but I added some processing to it, so we ended up getting something that was a little bit washier. So that was what we resampled. And now from this vocal that I re-recorded as audio, and we can also see it's audio, I'm going to put it into clip view. That's what the audio looks like. We can add some other things by converting this even more. So we have this single loop, vocal loop, with all the effects printed in and saved into this particular looping section. If I'm on Push, though, I have some options to convert it directly from Push and treat it even more from Push as well. So on Push itself, there's a button over here that says Convert. That's going to help me convert this clip into a couple of things. And it's very similar to how on in Live, not on Live, but in Live, when you right click on an audio clip, you have the option of converting it. But in this case on Push, we have a couple of options listed here directly on the interface of the hardware itself. And that's why I love using Push, just because it takes me away from the computer. So a lot of the time when I'm, producing music and experimenting with things, sometimes I feel like a lot of us get super caught up in just looking at our screens. But Push is a really great way of just getting away from that, because everything's kind of where you need it. Or let's put it this way, you have the most essential things that you need on Push. So there are some things that you can only do in Live, but on Push you can do already a lot. And for me, I find that takes me away from the computer in a really great manner. So let's convert this to a simpler, and let's see what happens. We have a couple of options that pop up here on Push. We've got simpler, so convert to simpler, convert to drum rack, and then we've got convert harmony to MIDI, melody to MIDI, and drums to MIDI. All of these will have different functions. Last week I spoke a lot about the convert to the harmony, melody, and drums functions. So this week I wanted to focus on simpler and drum rack from Push. But simpler is an instrument in Live that is a simple sampler. So it kind of relates a little bit to the actual name of itself, but it's a simple sampler, and it's a little bit of a friendlier version of Live's full sampler, which is great as well. But I find that the interface is a little bit overwhelming at times. So I love using simpler for more straightforward sampling stuff, as opposed to multi-sample instruments that you can do in sampler. But from here I've got this. Let's convert this to a simpler, and we'll see what happens. So Live takes a second. Sometimes it does pop a little bit because it takes a second to convert that. But now we have a new track that's loaded up here. And what I'm also going to do is from Push recolor that. So let's make it pink, because why not? And if I hit over here now, remember we had the do start off. Now we've got Let's also bump this up a little bit over here. Oop. And as you can see, it's all a little bit different. And that's because what I've done is I've said, okay, I have this piece of audio and I've given an instruction to Live that says, I would like you to convert this into a simple sampler so that I can play in the end different pitches depending on where I am. So I can play an octave higher. I can also play lower and it's slower. And this also relates to what we mentioned last week. We mentioned how when we start working with audio and live, we're paying attention to the relationship between time and pitch. Usually if you're working with a sample in a more traditional sense, and maybe if we have folks who have used the MPC before or heard of the MPC and more old school samplers, you might remember that the longer you have as a sample, the lower it sounds, or the lower you have, the longer a sample is. And the higher a sample is, the shorter it sounds. So it's kind of like that inverse sort of relationship. But what I like to do now is maybe if we have anyone tuning in, because I also saw the numbers jump up a little bit. So hi, welcome to anyone who just joined in. But if you're tuning in, we covered a couple of warp modes last week. So I would love a suggestion for a warp mode. Again, as a reminder, in live, you can warp audio, and that means have it bear a certain relationship to time and snap to time in a certain way for as a more general description. Some warp modes are like beats or complex or textures. So I would love a suggestion for a warp mode from the chat, please. And while I'm waiting for that, maybe I'll talk a little bit about warping itself. But warping itself is really good for being able to change the pitch and time of a section of audio independently from each other. So for example, in the instance that I just mentioned, that relationship between pitch and time, like having longer things will usually be a lot slower and a lot lower too. And having higher things is going to be a little bit faster. That's my imitation of that. But by warping, which is a specific engine in live, there are different kinds of modes that you can put audio into so that you can control these parameters independently of each other without having them necessarily affect one another. So you could have something that's very slow but also very high in pitch, or you could do the inverse too. You could have something that's very fast, but you could have something that's very low in pitch. Ooh, Paul, thank you for the suggestion. We had a suggestion from Paul in the YouTube chat for texture. So great. Let's warp this audio. Over here in live, you can see that there's a button here that says warp. You can also get that button on push. If you head over into the simpler, you have options for checking out the warp modes. And so I'm going to do this from push. And it might take a second sometimes. Wait, let's warp that as 4 bars. And now we can see, cool. I may need to remove this microphone because I'm a little far away, but give me 1 second. Yeah, there we go. That's much better. And then you have the option of putting this into different modes from here. So now we have texture. And what I'm also going to do is, might have to give push a second. It just blinked out on me. There we go. Complex and texture. Sometimes live reacts a little bit slowly if you're running a lot of different softwares, especially push. But now I'm able to control this depending on however I want to, by changing things like the pitch, by changing things like the starting point of the sample. So you'll notice how right now, whenever I press on any of these pads, there's a little bit of a gap between the actual time that I press on a pad and the time that I'm hearing a sound. So because of this, I'm going to change the starting point of this sound over here. So now, whenever I press any of these, the sample is going to start immediately playing through, even if it's very low. So we actually get some pretty interesting things the higher we go. I quite like that. Like this is a bit of a crazy kind of sound. Cool. You might also notice something about the way that I'm pressing these pads and the way that the samples are reacting. So we're in a mode of simpler at the moment that's called classic mode. What this means is that the sample or whatever audio I'm playing, like that for example, that's going to last as long as I'm pressing that pad. So the moment I let go, it will no longer play. And that's something that comes from a lot of classic types of samplers too. It also means that if you hold down something, it will probably loop. So let's hold this down if you have the right settings for it. But right now I don't have it looping, so it doesn't do that. I could have it loop though if I wanted to. So now I'll hold this down and it'll just repeat from the start again once the sample has ended playing. So these are a couple of different things that you can change in live. But one of my other favorite modes to put this into is called one-shot mode. And what one-shot mode does is it automatically kind of makes the entire sample play through by just hitting it once. And so let's put this into one-shot mode and I'll demonstrate that. So here we go. Maybe let's do a chord of this. So here we go. Or not a chord really, but rather different kinds of modes. Because on one shot you can only play one at a time. But this lets you do that. If I were to go back into classic, then I should be able to play things like chords. So I can play multiple notes, and it almost seems like it's maybe harmonizing with itself, which could be a really neat feature to explore. And then one-shot mode only lets you do one at a time. So something like that. And it will also play through the entire sample as well. You might have noticed that I just hit it once, and then I let go, but everything played out. So one thing I like to do whenever I'm in one-shot mode is to make the samples a little bit shorter. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this a shorter sample from push so that I just have maybe the first doot. And then from there, I can start playing with different kinds of melodies. I could play a scale with this. I could also play different kinds of, sorts of... Let me just change this a little bit. Of more synth-like sounds by changing the envelope. So what I just did over here is I changed the fades of this particular sound. So now I have less of that clear vocal texture, but it ends up being an interesting kind of synth. You can also change, of course, the fading in. So if we fade this in, I'm going to move the end so that's a little longer, but I will fade this in and also fade it out. So, boop, there we go. Fade this in. And now we may get something that's a little bit smoother. So that's a really cool way that you can start making different kinds of instruments using sample-based stuff. So what I like to do is maybe record something with this. So let's head back over into session view. I'm going to play back my drum loop with the drum and bassy type feel. Let's make it a little bit louder too. And then we'll pop over to our newly sampled vocal part. Let's make sure we select that. And I'm also going to up the volume a little bit and put this into accent. And let's record some drum parts. And as you can see, my timing was like way off, but we can quantize things. And in this case, maybe I'll even just take all of these notes and move them. This one's a little early, move that bit. Now this becomes cool because this is a starting point for a lot of different kinds of ideas to come about. And what I might even do then is add some effects to it. So I could put this into... Oh, let's actually... Well, I'll wait to put an effect on this. And instead, I would love for an effect suggestion from the chat. So if anyone in the chat would like to give a suggestion for an effect that we can put on this interesting synth, I will wait for that. So yeah, but please feel free to suggest any kinds of effects that you think might sound cool on this part. So we have a new vocal synth. It's funny, usually when I talk about vocal synthesis, it's like in the context of creating vocoders. But no, this time we have like an actual synth that was made out of my voice. So that's one-shot mode. And I think it's pretty good for creating leads and different kinds of sampled stuff. But there's also a third mode. So there's classic, which I mentioned was like the classic version of sampling. Then there's one shot, which lets you play one thing at a time and without having to hold down a pad. There's one more mode that might be my very close to my favorite. If one-shot mode is my favorite for being the most frequently used, then this next one is my favorite for being the most creative. But one thing I'm going to do first is duplicate this track from Push. So I'm going to hold down the duplicate button and press the track name on Push. And this way, from Push, I'm able to create a duplicate of that track. And it's going to be exactly the same thing. Push is also going to say, okay, track duplicated. So it's going to give me a little bit of feedback as well. Now, from this second duplicated track, though, I would like to put it into the third mode of Simpler. And that is slicing mode. What slicing mode does is it breaks up the sounds into different parts according to whether it's they're transient or different parts like that. And what I'm also going to do first, though, is go back into one-shot mode, but I will change the endpoint of this overall sample. I think I'd like to slice up everything. So I'm going to, or most of the things. So I'm going to maybe put that here. Let's do one shot. Let's back to slicing. There we go. Now we have all these different slices. And what Live has done is it said, okay, I'm kind of analyzing this piece of audio for now, and I'm going to chop these all up. And let me just check do we get any suggestions for audio effects? Not yet. Maybe soon. If you have an audio effect that you would like to throw in, everyone, please do. I'd be more than happy to show you how to put that up on Push as well, and we can start using it too. But for now, I have all of these different interesting types of samples that go on. Cool. And what I like about this is that because I did kind of, bathe this a little bit in reverb, is that now we have a lot of different kinds of textures of the same note. It might be cool to see what happens if we can bring this up by an octave or by a fifth. I think it might be nice to even bring it up by a fifth. So that's something that we can do from Push as well, or you can also do it from Live. And in this case, I'll do it from Push, but let's bring this up by a fifth. So let's do all of that. Now, here's a fun thing that I like to do sometimes when I'm playing with these kinds of sounds. So you'll remember that we had another kind of sound. Let's actually do down by a fifth. So let's do... So we got all these textures in the background. Sometimes what I do is I press random notes and I just see what happens. But it ends up being a really neat loop. And I'll show you exactly what I mean in a quick second. So here we go. Let's see if we can record an accompanying thing to our little new vocal beat. Cool. So we've ended up getting this like interesting sort of texture. And it might sound a little bit strange at first, like, what is Claire doing? To be honest, I ask myself that question a lot too, and I feel like if I'm not asking myself that question, I'm not exploring enough. So great, we kind of got this. It might be nice to see if we can come up with a different sort of texture as well. So we got this interesting sound. It's pretty neat. And I noticed that we still didn't get any suggestions for audio effects in the chat, but that's cool. Maybe I'll just go ahead and add one of my own that I've thought of. So let's play these back. Cool. And what I'll do is on the main vocal idea, or the main synthy sort of idea, let's add a filter delay to it. And I can do this also from Push as well. So right now I'm just scrolling to look for the filter delay. Aha, there it is. Great. And I can load an instance of filter delay up. Now I'm going to, if I stop all my clips and if I just play back this, you can hear that around the head. And you can also control how much of something you're hearing, which is great. I can also add some reverb and delay through these sends on push, which is what I'll do. Let's put some reverb on the vocals and delay. Now, because our main vocal idea is so dreamy and very pleasant, or fairly pleasant, I think, at least to my ears. Maybe it doesn't sound pleasant to you, which is great also because it means that all of us are different. So maybe I'll just try to create something a little bit more interesting with this vocal sample stuff. So I'm thinking off the top of my head that it might be nice to add on a couple of audio effects that add a little bit to the glitchiness of this. So I'm going to add a device to this track. It's going to be an audio effect as well from the audio effects category. And then we'll do some cooler stuff with more resampling techniques that I'd love to show you. So let's get started by, not MIDI effects, but audio effects. Cool. So like I said, this sounded a little bit polite at the moment. So generally for a lot of sounds that I find are a little bit polite, I like to change their timbre. And one of the things that I go to change the timbre of is, let's see if we can find it. Cool. Where is it? Yes, here it is. Erosion. It's one of those devices that I think always never fails to destroy a sound in the best way possible. I use the word destroy a lot when I teach, and perhaps I should find a different term because it has a little bit of a bad connotation to it, but it's great. I love destroying sounds. I think that's one of the best parts about live. Cool. The thing about erosion is that you can also kind of tune it to a resonating frequency that it's running with. So cool. So let's actually do that. We'll leave that as that. Now, the next thing I want to do is add a beat repeat behind this. And maybe this is the part where people think it's a little bit crazy. But sometimes when I'm building out different kinds of ideas to work with, especially if I'm experimenting, I like randomness. And I've found that beat repeat is a really great tool for that. There is a MIDI effect in Live that's called random that if you know how to use it, it works really well. But it does take a while to understand how it works. So I'm going to show you a more straightforward way, and that's by using beat repeat. So let's head over to the audio effects category. And boop. There we go. Beat repeat. Great. So here's our beat repeat. And I'm just going to pull up the default because what I like to do is from push show you a couple of ways that you can navigate the beat repeat device so that it ends up being pretty cool. So we've just put it on and immediately you will hear a little bit of an effect take place. There's some kinds of variations going on. I want to also bump up the pitch decay. There's a pitch decay knob that you can control as well. Let's also make the more transfer variation. So you can hear some interesting things happening already, stereo left and right. You can also control the filter of the repeats itself, because right now everything kind of sounds a little bit wompy. I use the term wompy a lot, but I feel like it's a good description. Let's turn the filter on for the beat repeat. And now you may be able to hear. Aha. Get some interesting things. Let's also have more of a decay. And there's a couple of ways that you can use beat repeat. There are 3 different modes. There's mix, insert, and gate. And mix and insert are personally 2 of my favorites. Gate I do use sometimes, but what mix does is it essentially gives you a mix of the original signal as well as the repeated signal that's also in this case like filtered. We've done a bunch of things to it as well. And I'm also going to shift this up a little bit. Yeah, cool. And insert almost functions as if this might be inserted directly on as a different instrument. Like if we talk about insert effects and return and send effects, that's kind of what this is. But I'm going to set this to mix because I kind of want a mix of both. And I'm also going to change the repeat rate of this too. And to be honest, you hear me talk about all of these parameters, but when I first started learning how beat repeat works, I was just twisting all these knobs, and it ended up being the best. So that's essentially what you can do a lot of. Cool. So I want a bit actually less variation, and let us go to the main menu. Ooh, whoops! Accidentally triggered something. No problem. Cool. And I want more likely variation. Cool. So what I'm also doing is I'm kind of changing some of the grid values as well. And the more you change this, the more like interesting sounds you can get. You can also see the visuals of the beat repeat change a little bit as you change certain parameters. You can also choose to turn the repeat itself on or off, which will affect how it sounds as well. So cool. So we got a little bit of that. Sometimes I like using this a lot as a technique for creating additional textures, especially if I need a little bit movement in a little bit more movement, in songs. And ooh, Andrew, have been an erosion fan since it was introduced. Absolutely, yeah, I have as well. I think it's, like I said, it's one of my favorite tools for destruction. But no, not for destruction, but just for a little bit more variation. I think people often underestimate a lot of these devices that they tend to put into like an aggressive sort of category. But I think when you're working with audio, that's sometimes what you need. You need to be bold and you need to be aggressive with some of the things that you do. So great, I have erosion over here. Now another thing that I do like to do, and I'm going to do it now after the beat repeat because we got those cool repetitions happening, right? There's another quote unquote destruction thing that I like a lot as an audio effect that's called Redux. And if we have any fans of 8-bit music watching out there, maybe you know of this. Redux, let's find Redux. We have to scroll all the way down. Redux, here we go. Roller Rate, hello, greetings. Hope you are well. Welcome back. Yeah, it's cool. I feel like sometimes we don't use what we don't understand, maybe because we're a little bit like fearful in a way. I know I was fearful, but cool. So now we have Redux. This is going to be different as well. So check this out. I'm also going to make this a little bit louder in the mix. Let's bring that volume up. Cool. And let's go back to device view. So here's Redux. It's going to be it's basically a little bit like somewhat a bit crusher, but different ways of doing it. There's soft resampling and there's downsampling and hard downsampling. So you can do stuff like that, or do it partially. You can also do bit reduction, which I'm gonna make a little softer. Because it's going to affect the way that we hear things. So here is some bit reduction. That crunchiness, amazing. Gonna take a pause. But yeah, that's bit reduction. And just to maybe put us all on the same page, I feel like bit crushing is a word that's thrown around a lot. But in the case of Redux, bit reduction is pretty straightforward. What we're talking about is maybe you've seen before in a lot of music, people talk about like, oh, this is 24-bit, or this is 16-bit, or this is 8-bit, and they're all kind of multiples of 8. And that's in a way related to a lot of music itself electronically. I know that we have a couple of people watching who are a little bit more technically inclined. So I'll just mention this very briefly without nerding out completely, but traditionally, we think about computer information being represented in binary, which is 0 or 1, and that's why we talk a lot about bits and bytes when we're talking about electronic music too. But bit reduction is basically the greater the number of bits you have, the bigger the difference between the loudest point and the softest point that you could have in a song with noise. I'm trying to not explain this in too complicated terms because you can get very techie with it. But in a nutshell, if you have less bits, the noisier something will be. If you have more bits, the less noisy something will be. And there will always usually be some kind of noise. And that's why we talk about a noise floor and things like that. But in this case, what we're saying is, okay, we're telling Live, we want you to pretend that this audio has a super limited number of bits. So because of that, it's becoming a lot crunchier and a lot more reduced in its sounding, reduced, quote unquote. I think that's why they called it Redux as a, ooh, whoops, touch my camera, Redux as a name. But yeah, and if you think back to a lot of music, maybe from video games, the term 8-bit might come to mind a lot. So that is absolutely where it comes from too. 8-bit music is an entire thing on its own now. But 8-bit was initially where we were at, and then 16-bit and now 24-bit. Sometimes you have people talking about 32-bit float as well. That's another thing that you might have seen thrown around as a term a lot. But great, now we have this. It's a little bit like radio-esque. I might increase the bits actually, maybe to like 8-bit or so. But increase the sampling, downsampling. Maybe until it's resonating a little bit more with some of the pitches in here. Great, cool. So now that we've got this sound, I think it might be nice to resample this. So this is really how crazy you could get with a lot of it's not super crazy actually, but it's just one way of additional craziness that you could put into your music. I think it might be nice also though to have a little bit of EQ and compression. So this is something that I showed people previously, but I tend to keep a lot of racks for myself as audio effects, where if I want EQ and compression, I can just drag a rack on from my library, which is something that I made as well. But here, so now we have some EQ and compression. Let's EQ and compress the sound so we can tighten things up a little bit. Let's bring this maybe up until here, about 150 or so. And let's also do a little bit of a dip around like 4K, because there seems to be some stuff popping up over there. And then we can bring the threshold of the compressor down. So now you can really hear a lot of that graininess. Let's also have a higher ratio and a faster attack and release. Now for the purposes of like doing some interesting panning related things with this, what I'm also going to do is add on one more audio effect, and that's called auto pan. So let's grab auto pan, and I'm only doing this from live now since I'm already here. But let's put auto pan. Let's put it after the EQ and the compression. And you could put it before too, I feel. But auto pan is a really neat mode where instead of doing a regular auto pan and having it say go from left to right like this, if you're wearing headphones, you might be able to hear this more clearly. You kind of hear the sound going from left to right. Instead of doing it in a smooth manner, you can assign it to noise, and you can randomize this noise too. So make it a little crazy. And I would like it to be synced up in a way, but let's also increase the shape a little bit. So it can get like pretty weird between the ears at least. But this is great. Now we can have this as like a background texture. And we got here from this sound. We totally got here from that sound originally as it was recorded, and of course with some drums and a pad. Cool. So before we get ahead of ourselves, the next thing that you can do after this is just resample it again. So that's one thing that I do. I make something and then I resample it again and try to come up with something a little bit more interesting as well. But yeah, let's go for it and do it. I'm also going to take a minute though to rename a couple of my tracks because as you can see, I've got like so many tracks that are called resampling, and that's because some of them do have resampling in them, others don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tidy this up a little bit. So let's move these over here. I'm going to call this vocal chop, and I'm going to call this vocal glitch, just so that we're a little bit more organized. And now let's resample this again too. So I'm going to call this resampling 1. Then I had resampling 2, so let's do resampling 3. Just so I know that each of these are like different pieces that I'm resampling from. Great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to resample into this audio track. And you can see, great, my resampling is activated. But that said, I only want to sample in the vocals. I don't want to put in my voice. I'm going to mute myself for a quick second. But then I'll start playing that glitch part and we'll resample that too. So here we go. I will see you all shortly. Well, I haven't left, but here we go. Cool. Oh, awesome. And before I do this, now that I remember, before I start muting myself, I would love if people could have suggestions of some audio effects that they like in the chat. And while I'm recording this and resampling this, I'll record that. And then if anyone wants to suggest any audio effect that you might like, go ahead and put that in the YouTube chat and I'll be right back. Here we go. Let's resample this. Cool, and I'm back. And as you can see, we have resampled it. Some parts we do need to tidy up a little bit because there are some differences in volume, but that's essentially what I have now. And I can, again, take this and I can do some crazy stuff to it too. I can chop it up into slices. I'll get different slices now as well. So that'll be something that can happen too. Although I do quite like this as a texture. Ooh, it looks like we had gated reverb and echo from gated reverb from Roller 8, and we had echo from Mick Pattison. Thanks, y'all, for those. So what we'll do now is that we'll put, I think I'd like to, let's see what we'll do. So for gated reverb, I usually think of it on things like vocals and stuff. So maybe we can even do that on the vocal chops. Let's see. Cool. So since I have reverb on this, which is how we get this. Oh, no, I don't. I have filter delay. Let's put a reverb on this, and let's do some gated stuff with it, too. Now, what I like to do is make the decay time a little shorter, but instead, I'll have quite a wet version of this. Cool. So there we go. Great. Let's also cut some of those lows. Great. And now what I like to do is put like a gate on this. So sometimes I get interesting effects from gates as well. Let's pull up the gate in live, and we'll also do some cool resampling stuff with this. So the cool thing about gates is that because they react to volume, sometimes they end up being pretty interesting for different kinds of like chopping up purposes, especially if you use them in the right way. So I'm going to increase the hold on this as well. So now we get like a different kind of texture. Fast release, actually. Let's do a very fast release. Cool, and let's resample this as well. I'm gonna mute myself, and I'll be back. Cool. So there we are. There's our resampled bit again. But this is cool because now if we wanted to, we could even re-chop this up further. So we could say, let check. Ooh, yes, we're back. Cool. Thanks for holding up with that, everyone. I think live was so overwhelmed that I know you can't see it differently on the screen because it kind of froze. But live was, wow, it must have been so impressed with all of the resampling that we did that it decided to freeze and crash. Yeah, we're back. Amazing, cool. So on that note, it's always great to save your work. So I'm gonna press Control S or Command S to save that. Control S, ooh, whoops, now I'm like moving everything. Control S if you are on a PC, Command S if you are on a Mac. But yay, we're back, great. So let's head back over to our resampling stuff, right back in the game. And let's go for it. Let's convert this into a simpler. Ooh, whoops, shifted around a bunch. Oh yes, because push restarted as well. Cool, so I'm gonna head over here on push and let's go into session view. Great, so now let's convert that. And the stuttering, just so you know, is built into the sound because we did some gatey things just now. So let's do simpler. And re-chop this up again. Again, live will take a second. Let's also change the color to another shade of pink or purple. And let's head over here. Let's go straight into slicing mode. So now we have all of these other samples. And I'm also going to bump up the volume as well. So a different kind of way of even creating other melodies. So I love doing this. I love bouncing and rebouncing and creating all sorts of different things. Ooh, there we go. Too loud, but that's all right. Now here's another way that I like to do things as well. So when you put things into a simpler, especially when you are slicing it, what happens is that you get all of these individual notes and slices. One thing I do sometimes is, okay, I find the starting note of something, and I'm going to put accent on for this case. I find the starting note of a sample, and I find the highest note also of a sample. So in this case, it should be C1 as the lowest note, which is over here. Great. So what I do is I click on this and I drag it out. But if I want to get different variations of the same note, I'll create a bunch of copies of all of these. So it looks a little crazy, I will admit, but it all will make sense in a short moment. So what I've just done is I've created a bunch of different like MIDI notes that are all a bar long. But I'll use this with an arpeggiator on it to create some interesting variations. So check this out. Let's put an arpeggiator on this. We'll set it to random and we'll let it go. So here we go. And it all falls in time as well. So let's also throw a compressor and EQ on this. From my, yeah, there it is, my racks. Great. So after this, we'll see if we can maybe play a bunch of all of these together and layer them differently. And you know what? Let's also bump this up a little bit too. Turn off the metronome. Cool. Let's actually bump it down even more. So let's do, or let's do, should we do above? Yeah, let's do above. Take down 1K a little bit. And give this a little bit lift at the top. Very cool. So we'll take a pause there and I'm gonna move this over here. Maybe I'll call this like Vox Chop Random or something else a little bit more descriptive than resampling 4. So Vox Chop Random. Great. And now we've got all of these different parts. But that's it though. I want to kind of revisit them a little bit. So I've got my drum and bass stuff. I've got my pads. I think cool. For this random one, let's see. That was the original. Yeah, let's bring these down an octave instead. So I'm going to hit over here and transpose them down instead. Cool. And then we have this higher glitchy sort of thing. And then we'll have a lower type of sound. Cool. So let's go ahead and see what we can do with this. Here we go. Let's remind ourselves what we got. So we got some drums. And you know what? Let's bring this pad down an octave or two. Maybe until it's a bass sound. there's our original sound. We started there, and we will end there too. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. This was a really fun episode. We kind of went through, as a recap, a little bit of what it means to work more with audio, especially on Push, and figure out ways that you can add different kinds of effects, different layers of things. Now we kind of have this weird liquid drum and bass glitchy type of thing, which could absolutely be developed more. So maybe if I take to this, I'll keep working on it. But thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. If you want to find out more about us, as usual, we have streams every day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This is just the Monday show, but there's also the Tuesday show, the Wednesday show, 2 shows on Thursday, and Friday. So please stay tuned. We've also got some exciting things coming up in 343 Labs for the next semester ahead, or the next fall season. I'll be teaching a class on live, which Paul is in the chat. If Paul is still there, he's been in attendance in the past as well. So if you want to find out more about doing that class with us, please head over to the 343 Labs website. You can find us at 343labs.com. But thank you, everyone, for watching. This was really fun. Like I said, my name's dolltr or Claire, and I hope to see you next week. But also, I hope that you tune in tomorrow for some Techno Tuesday with John Selway. Until then, have a great rest of the week. Bye.
Across the universe, a whisper wakes. Have you been listening for a wind of change? My ears are open, eyes aren't closed. I'm waiting for a miracle again. Have you been calling out my name? Oh, we're in a world taken by madness, sadness in a sea of stolen words, broken and shattered. What mattered means no more. In a time shaken by thunder, wonder is the seed of life forgone, crippling under. What happened to us all? We fade, pulled back into the shade. We fade, pulled back into the shade. across the universe, so whisper wakes. Have you been listening?